Hi, it's Steve Riley. Welcome to this episode of Great Practice, Great Life. Today, we're going to intertwine how do you build a great practice and great life around a particular theme, which is how to build a client-centric law firm. Now, myself and my guest, Daniel Struna, go to two different levels. One, we talk about practical tips on how you can build a client-centric law firm. We also look from a cultural perspective and a strategic perspective, how you play a long-term game. So some of the things I want you to listen for is how does customer service impact the growth of a client-centric culture? What are the 3 C's that are critical to building a client-centric culture? What's the one simple practical question that myself and Daniel talk about that you can use immediately today? Daniel, welcome to the episode.
Thank you, Steve. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me back. I think this is number 4 for me, so it's kind of becoming a thing, and I appreciate the invitation.
It's great to have you here, but I also want to give
Thank
you I want to give you a huge compliment and a particular shout out to one of your clients. He's a fantastic attorney, uh, Kent Burke in Arizona. Kent was just on one of our last episodes of Grow Your Practice with AI, with artificial intelligence. And I know you're coaching Kent.
you.
He's a estate and trust litigator in Arizona, one of the top ones in the state, if not the top one.
Yep.
He did a presentation of how he's using AI in his practice, which was fantastic. So he was one of 2 presenters, and I just want to give you a compliment because he gave you a particular shout out on what a great job you're doing. We're getting him back on again just because there's so much to learn from that big brain of his. He just did a great job, really great job.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, Kent is fantastic. He's doing some phenomenal things that are just like kind of miles ahead of where some other, what other firms are even thinking at this point. And he's doing it in a space that I just find fascinating that helps. And I think all Atticus clients in particular and law firms in general, it's a particular area that he's working in specifically with AI that any firm can take and, magnify or amplify the effects of AI in that particular area.
Let's talk more about the 3 C's. You and I have come up with 3 C's for building a client-centric culture. So, first one is communication. And I think the clarity around what you're communicating is the core element. So if you have a firm mission statement, if you have firm values, and you're trying to make the client the hero of your firm's story, being able to consistently communicate that to your team is part of your job as a leader and part of your job as a manager, as part of the whole firm culture. It's easier said than done because sometimes as lawyers, we say something once and we think we don't need to say it again. This is probably where it pays the most to over communicate and create a habit of reinforcing this particular type of communication. To a certain extent, it almost becomes a mantra inside of team meetings and team conversations. So the first one for me is communication. How about you?
Yeah, so agreed. And I think the other aspect of communication is the client, obviously, of course, like you said, related to the team and creating the culture in the first place. And um, I think Brene Brown gets credited with saying clear is kind, right? So that kind of being incredibly clear and in the communication of what you're trying to accomplish as a team, right? When it comes to specifically the client experience. And then the other aspect of communication is, of course, how it relates to the clients themselves, right? How are we showing up and communicating with the client? How are we, listening to them, actively and hearing what they have to say and not just what we think they're going to say and that sort of thing. And then how are we proactively and very, this is probably just proactively communicating with our clients, right? And prospect. And I think communication in that sense is so important because it's if we look just historically, right, it's the number one complaint, bar complaint against attorneys pretty much nationwide, which is lack of communication. And so it's kind of, lack low hanging fruit in a sense because the bar is really low in terms of how other firms are doing it. So any way that we can improve the quality of our communication with our clients, um, and but also the clarity, right? And then the being proactive, I think, is just a huge one.
Once you teach your team members it's permissible to complain about clients,
Yeah,
permissible to complain about referral sources, permissible to complain about each other, you have now thrown up on them and you've caused a negativity virus and it will start to spread and ultimately hurt the growth of your firm. It's a terrible thing. One of the terrible lessons I had to learn. It's one of the terrible lessons I've had to help other lawyers clean up and fix. So the care is important, and care is reflected not only by your behavior, your team's behavior, but also how you treat your clients in front of your team when your clients aren't there. That's a
yeah.
critical lesson, painful lesson I learned. Anything you want to add to that?
Two things. One, just kind of a nugget that you dropped there, which is, for any attorneys listening that are outside of the Atticus community, one of the things that you don't might not have is what Steve mentioned, which is anywhere to take those sort of, those sort of complaints, right? Somebody to kind of have a shoulder to talk to, cry on, or a person to talk to, whether it's the coach or people in your group or one of your rope team members. So I just think you kind of just hit on one of the huge advantages of, coaching, frankly, or having some sort of supportive community that you can be involved in. So I just think that's important to highlight that. The other part I would say is with care. Part of what I'm hearing you say, Steve, is that my mind goes to trust. So you have an attorney that wants to, turn things around and like create this culture, this client-centric culture and get their team on board. But if there's not a foundation of trust amongst the team members to be able to do that, it's pretty much going to fall flat, right? Because the team is going to know it's not really the real deal. And there's no level. They don't have any. It's hard to be caring and empathetic and supportive when to the clientele when you're not existing in a similar environment, as a culture. So I think that's part of it. And I think that goes back to foundationally a level of trust.
When I think of a great client experience, how do you make it a client-centric firm? I always try and look at it from the perspective of how does a process make the client journey easier, quicker, faster, cheaper, better in some way, shape, or form. So you could look at it, I guess, from both viewpoints, from a marketing perspective, and how do you come at it from a customer service, client service perspective to make it quicker, faster, easier, and cheaper on delivering your promise to client. So the first thing, let's create a definition. Let's work with a definition. So for me, a client-centric firm first begins with the lawyer's mindset. The lawyer has to get their brain wrapped around who the hero of the story is. The hero of the story in most firms is the lawyer. And sometimes they'll include their team, hand out some capes, they look like the Avengers. But at the core of it, that's more about them.
Yeah.
To be a client-centric firm, you have to pivot your thinking. Your mindset has to shift to how do I make it easier on my prospects? How do I help my clients go through their heroic journey through my firm? And I think that's probably the first pivot that people really have to look at and ask, who is the hero here, me or the client as they go through the firm? Because if that's the case, then the emotional focus has to move off of you from a vanity perspective. I'm so important. I'm so incredible. My team's so important. I'm so incredible. They're so incredible. To
Yeah.
how do we make life easier on our client as they go through whatever process inside the firm? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I think that's totally, you're spot on. And I do agree with you, Steve, that creating a client centric culture is a process conversation. The building blocks of how you create the client centric culture to begin with is all built on process and how you interact with the client. When I said that for me, it's also a marketing conversation, I think what I meant by that is that the better the client experience that you create is a marketing tool, right, as well. It acts as a form of marketing in the sense that the better I've heard you say this before, clients or prospects really can't judge us. And so for me, that is a competitive advantage in the marketplace when when you have that mindset like you're talking about and that shift to where you're putting it's almost more than just putting the client first. It's like you said, it's putting the client and positioning them really as the hero of the story, and then changing how we think about what it, and all the different kind of cascading effects that'll have on how we operate our law firm and the processes of how we do that.